Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Victoria Ugweme, the chair of Southampton Stand Up to Racism. And I would like to say on behalf of myself and our members, we're so thankful for you honoring our invitation. So before I start, I would like to do a few housekeeping. We will be videoing this event so that people that are unable to attend will be able to watch it on a later time. So please, if you don't want to be filmed, I suggest you switch off your camera because this will be aired later on YouTube. Thank you. On the 22nd of April 1993, at the age of just 18, Stephen Lawrence was murdered in an unprovoked racist attack. After the initial police investigation, 5 suspects were arrested but not convicted. A public inquiry into the handling of Stephen's case was held in 1998, leading to the publication of the Macpherson Report. The report concluded that the Metropolitan Police Services was institutionally racist and since has been called one of the most important moments in the modern history of criminal justice in Britain. It led to a profound cultural change in attitudes towards racism, to the law, and to the police practice. It also paved the way for a greater understanding of discrimination and of all its forms, leading to a new equality legislation. In contrast, the recent report of the Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities, this has sought to deny the existence of institutional racism and has rightly been widely rejected as a retrograde step that will undermine the attempts to understand and tackle systemic racism. Jayanti Shah, our long-term anti-racist campaigner in Southampton, and Nahella Ashraf, the co-chair of Greater Manchester Stand Up to Racism, will introduce this important and timely discussion as we mark Stephen Lawrence Day and reflect on his legacy. We also have one of our, so before we will start, I would like Jayanti Shah to speak to us on the issues pre-Stephen Lawrence, what the reality was for the BME people at the Macpherson Report and its impact to us even to this day. So thank you all, and I hope you enjoy today's event. So please, can we have Jayanti Shah?
Thank you, Victoria. Hopefully everybody can hear me. I have been involved with this area of race. I've been one of the um, key spokesperson in Black History Month for the in its early days. My focus today will be institutional racism. Racism before Stephen Lawrence murder, the inquiry, the Macpherson report, the key issues that it raised, institutional response to it, and policy changes. And I hope to finish with how, over the last 15 years or so, the commitments made after Macpherson report have been diluted and watered down on a race agenda. Black and brown, by the way, when I say black and brown or ethnic minorities, I really mean black and brown people, right? Or people of color, as some people prefer it. Black and brown people have repeatedly, before the before the death of Stephen Lawrence, were complaining that we don't get a fair shake in terms of policing, criminal justice system, in the job markets, in the way we were treated by the whole range of public authorities. The establishment, both political and social, would say that we were making the whole thing up, or at least we were exaggerating. two generations of black people, we all apparently with chips on our shoulders. Now I know why my shoulders are so heavy. Macpherson Report was seminal. People forget what it was like living in Britain before 1993. And, they just, it doesn't, things have changed. There have been 4 racial murders of high profile in London before 1993. People working in the anti-racist field, such as the lawyer for the Lawrence family, Imran Khan, were getting constantly a brick wall from police officers and other agencies. And they were saying, look, this is not about race. It was almost impossible to get those in authority to accept that race existed as a problem. New Home Monitoring Project was formed in 1980 as a community campaign following the murder of a local teenager in East London, a teenager called Akhtar Ali Beg. The campaign failed to get justice for Akhtar, but still the project continued monitoring racist attacks and the police response or lack of police response to those racist attacks. Unfortunately, the project closed in 2016 due to lack of funds after 36 years of supporting communities suffering racist violence oppressive policing in East London. I suspect the police were quite happy that it is shut down. And Southampton, on the other hand, in early 70s, set up what was called Community Relations Council, and Commission for Racial Equality was very active. The Community Relations Council in Southampton became the Southampton Race Equality Council. They did a lot of good work. They had 3 or 4 officers, ranging from employment issues to legal issues to victim support to client support. They did a lot of good work. They participated actively with the city council. There was a city council race subcommittee. Race was an issue on its own. It wasn't diluted with other things, such other discriminations. And today we refer to as hate crime. But race still stands out. There are people who are disabled and there are people who have other forms of discriminations are also victims of racial crimes. I remember one incident in Southampton, though. The employment officer of the city council had arranged a meeting with Tyrrell and Green managing director. Tyrrell and Green is now become John Lewis Partnership, or was part of John Lewis Partnership at the time, but was trading under Tyrrell and Green. The managing director of Tyrrell and Greens had suggested very softly to the employment officer that the meeting should be outside his offices because he didn't want Southampton Race Equality Council to turn up at his office. This was in early 80s. So meeting was held, it was held outside Southampton. Now those were the days when the shops did not have any black or brown people in the front. What Lawrence case did was made the race as mainstream subject. It made it something people and institutions had to recognize, acknowledge, and accept. Before that, it was something that the left and liberals and me talked and campaigned as a fringe issue. Now the so-called Middle England had to accept that the race existed, or at least they had to talk about it. The Lawrence case prompted a fundamental rethink by the police. It influenced governance of policing, the way police were supervised, the way complaints are investigated, influence investigations. Family liaison officers were created. The first hour at the murder scene, the independent advisors. Did it go far enough? I don't think so. But it went further than what was expected at the time. There were absolutely obvious improvements in the immediate aftermath of the inquiry, as raft of institutions reacted to Macpherson's recommendations. They were falling over each other to implement some of the recommendations. But, but over time, the priorities shift, and those resistant to change have asserted themselves. Look at the running soar of stop and search. Stop and search problems are getting worse. Something has gone wrong. You were 4 or 5 times more likely to be stopped and searched in 1999. Do you know what it is now? It is 8 or 10 times. When we talk about equalities now, I don't think so. They've dropped off the agenda. The momentum is gone. When was the last time in Southampton or anywhere in the country, in the elections, in the manifesto of the three main parties, did you actually have racism mentioned in leaflets, race mentioned in leaflets? Look at the leaflets that are dropping through your letterbox for the May elections for both police and crime commissioners and local councils. If you find a mention of racism, please, please, please do share it with us as Southampton for Stand Up to Racism. Racism is a systematic oppression of communities based on the color of the people. It can thrive even when open prejudice has declined. If we stop measuring racism in attitude surveys and legislative change, we would realize the real test is to analyze the disadvantages faced by ethnic communities, the test that Britain is hopelessly failing at. If we examine any area of life, we will see significant racial inequalities. For instance, the unemployment rate for all ethnic minorities is still higher than its white counterparts, and it has been made worse by the pandemic. Health is another area of viscous inequality. Ethnic minority groups are significantly more likely to be impacted negatively, COVID being the obvious example. But before this pandemic, health inequalities were still and still are very stark in other health areas such as diabetes, prostate cancer, etc. The picture gets even bleaker. With ethnic minority groups 60% more likely to suffer from depression, young Asian women are 3 times as likely to commit suicide, and Black people are up to 6.6 times more likely to be detained under a Mental Health Act. Now, this last statistics intersects with the systematic overrepresentation of Black people in the criminal justice system. I don't mean overrepresentation because there are more Black judges or Black lawyers. You know what I mean when I say there is an overrepresentation of Black people. We are now nearly 57 years after the Race Relations Act, 20 odd years since the Macpherson Report. Not only is racism alive and well, but the governments and public institutions have actively avoided dealing with the issue until the Black Lives Movement protest rocked the country last year. Then the government's pathetic response, as Chair has said earlier, was to set up its Race and Ethnic Disparities Commission. It was packed with deniers that institutional racism exists. Like Holocaust deniers, I think they were told to deny institutional racism in its findings. And what a joke, apart from the findings and recommendations, they focused on individual prejudices, race awareness, training, things we were talking about 30, 40 years ago, only to allow people to feel comfortable that they are not to blame because it is the backward racists who are the problem. Institutions and policymakers, government filling out old minister to promote Black role models in the way to success for those who have not taken advantage of the apparent opportunities that Britain has to offer, how far Britain has come. The reality of racism is is a different picture now, without being any better. The picture is that it includes less open prejudice, more mixed friendships and families, and some ethnic and Black success stories. But the backdrop is systematic racial inequalities that blight the communities, creating countless victims. The truth is no legislative change will end systematic discrimination in Britain because racism is coded in the DNA of the institutions of the state. Not that the government is bringing any laws anytime soon to dismantle institutional racism in its structures of strength. The opposite reality. Remember the Home Secretary calling the Black Lives protest as dreadful. Then appoint, and dare I say it, appoint an Uncle Tom to chair its commission on racial disparities. It's a sick joke, the worst possible insult to the memory of Stephen Lawrence. Rightly, his mother, Doreen Lawrence, has called out this charade. If we are serious about addressing systematic racism, then we need to stop focusing on the prejudices of individuals. Britain must acknowledge the uncomfortable history and the reality of racial discrimination and be prepared to consider the solutions that transfers conditions faced by the BME people. Will Britain do that? I don't think so. Now, Britain has got long-standing institutions. It's got long-standing traditions practiced by all institutions: monarchy, Church of England, Ministry of Defense, Army, judicial systems, all the institutions. But they are built around the past when Britain had an empire, and the institution in Britain has not yet come to terms with the end of colonization and empire. And I think it can only do so if the institutions themselves change. I hope I haven't gone too long, but thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jayanti Shah. This is very enlightening and informative. And that is a reason why we need history. History helps us to understand where we were, where we are going, and what we intend to achieve. Because without history, we tend to lose the core reason why changes needs to happen. And I will also say thank you to Councillor David Shields for the comment you've left and the links. David Shields is our Southampton's cabinet member for Stronger Communities, and it's a wonderful pleasure to have you here. So thank you. And I also noticed on the comment, someone has also put something about the anti-racism stuff on the leaflet. So we're going to have a look at that. So thank you for sending that through. So now we are delighted to have Nahella Ashraf from Manchester as our other speaker. Nahella is the co-chair of Manchester Stand Up to Racism. And I know she's been doing some amazing work up north on these issues such as racism. And Nahella has been at the heart of it. So Nahella, thank you and welcome.
Thanks so much. And thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I'm not sure, it's a lot to live up to. But first, I think I want to start by saying, I think I speak on behalf of everybody in this meeting and across obviously Stand Up to Racism when we start with sending our solidarity and respect to Stephen Lawrence's family and friends who have fought for so long to get justice. Let's be very clear, I don't think we would be marking this day and remembering that horrific murder if it wasn't for the strength of conviction that his family and the campaign that they had and you know, they fought for decades, let's be very clear, and in fact in many ways are still fighting for justice. And I just want to start with saying, you know, lots of people have talked about the report, and I think you start with saying it's not a surprise, but anyone that knew who Tony Sill, who headed up the inquiry, was and what his ideas were not going to be surprised with the conclusions that he made. And indeed, I think it's I think Stand Up to Racism at the time got it spot on when they put out a statement when it says that the report was always going to be a whitewash because both Sill and Boris Johnson's chief advisor, Munira Mercer, who was one of the key figures responsible for commissioning the report, have both actually long since denied the existence of institutional racism. And the report was commissioned explicitly, and I quote this, it was explicitly commissioned to change the narrative. And that's a really interesting point to remember, that they commissioned the report to change the narrative. But I think also it's really important to say, no matter how much they try to change the narrative, it doesn't, change the facts on the ground. It doesn't change what it means. I mean, they can scrap the term BAME, but it doesn't change the reality of people's lives. It's, I would say, a highly controversial report, especially when you think about the fact that, we've talked about the Macpherson Report. Prior to that, we had the Scarman Report. And now we have this. And basically what they're trying to do is shift the narrative, as if it's all, as the previous speaker so eloquently said, we have a chip on our shoulder. Somehow it's our victim mentality. And I think it's really important to say that they are absolutely pandering to the right wing. This report absolutely legitimizes some of the ideas I think that the right wing already have. And that's absolutely shocking for our mainstream politicians, and people in the establishment should do that. But not surprising, bearing in mind the Tory party's history around racism. So that's one thing to say. The other thing I think to start with saying is, why have they pushed this report out? Why now? What do they want to do with it? And I would say two things. One is, it's a reflection of the success of the anti-racist movement and the success of Black Lives Matter. We have, over the last, it's almost been a year of being out on the streets, campaigning around the issue of racism. And it's really important to say that thousands of people came out in Britain, but hundreds of thousands across the world actually, to stand in solidarity with the family of George Floyd, and our sisters and brothers in America who were fighting on the front line. But I think it's really important to say that, when we did come out, and we came out in huge numbers, especially bearing in mind there was a pandemic, we didn't just come out in solidarity with what was happening in the US. We came out because we recognized that the issues in America, the systemic racism within the US society that allows a Black man to be killed, because that's what happened, with impunity by the police. He was never going to get charged. The police officer was never going to get charged, and never has been charged in the past when police have killed Black men in America. The very system that allowed the death of George Floyd, the horrific murder of George Floyd, is the very system that actually we have here in Britain today. The system that allows hundreds of thousands of people to lose their lives under COVID. Disproportionately, Black people, let's be very clear, Black and Asian people have lost their lives. So it was a very system that we saw that made us come out in the numbers that we came out. And I think for the first time, because we were out in such huge numbers, but also in such unity, it was Black and white people out together, out on the streets under a pandemic, and we kept to the streets. It's very important to say this. We didn't just go have a big demonstration. It was a moment of anger and we all went home. No, I think we kept out on the streets, and we managed to, I think, really win the argument within the wider society that actually racism is an issue in Britain, to the point where we had politicians taking the knee, wanted to be seen to be on the right side of history. We had talks of, and we're still having talks, aren't we, around this idea of decolonizing the curriculum. There's a recognition that we already knew actually our education system was failing, Black boys in particular, with all the levels of exclusion, but recognizing there is a problem with the actual curriculum that we're being taught. The idea that we now talk openly about the role of the police and how they impact the Black community, disproportionately impact the Black community and target the Black community. If you look at, I won't be surprised to say this, that the number of people that have been fined, charged under the COVID legislation will have been more predominantly people from the Black community, when the likes of, Dominic Cummings has just been, he had no case to answer apparently. When you have all of that going on, when you have, sports players taking the knee before matches, This is really important. You have BBC commentators being asked how they feel about the Black Lives Matter movement and asked how they feel about racism in British society today. It is an absolute reflection of the success of the movement. I think it's really important we never forget this. This report has come out on the back of that work that we have done and the movement, the global movement that we have built, but particularly the strength of the movement here in Britain. So it is, you know, I think the government saw that and thought we need to do something, and they needed to stop the movement. They needed to smash the movement and try to divide it. And I think that's why they're pushed for this report. And they said it in themselves, they want to change the narrative. They want to blame Black people for their victim mentality, that this is nothing to do with racism. This is, you know, it's the odd black apple, you know, bad apple in society. That yes, there is racism, as you see on Twitter, towards, you know, footballers, but actually as Britain, apparently we're a beacon for the world. Well, I'm telling you this, I don't know anyone in the Black community that feels that, or, you know, and it makes you wonder what data they looked at or who they spoke to, you know, which people, who in the Black community they speak to come out with this, the outcome that they came out with. And I think it's really important to say they did it because they're scared of us. We have known in the past that when they commission a report, they take years to come out. Actually, this one, they have absolutely rushed through, and they have done that because they are scared of the Black Lives Matter movement and the momentum that we have built. So I want to start with saying that from the beginning. I think the authors, the other thing to say is that the outcome, apologies for the phone ringing in the background, that even their recommendations have no credibility, not just amongst ourselves in the anti-racist movement, but I think wider afield. I think there is real recognition that it has no credibility. And I think it's even really interesting, even I think it was a day after the report, even Boris Johnson, after the claim that, you know, we are a beacon for other countries, came out and said, well, yes, we recognize that there is still some work to do around racism. So I think that's the thing that we need to say. And we need to absolutely, I think, start with celebrating. And I think it is a week for celebrations. When you think about what happened in America with a guilty verdict, the unanimous guilty verdict, it's an absolute recognition and a celebration of the work that we have done. Because it isn't about whether it's here in Britain or whether it's America, it isn't about actually the system worked. You know, it wasn't that, oh, justice was delivered and the system worked, everything's fine, let's go home now. Because actually, if the system had worked, George Floyd would still be alive today. The system does not work. It hasn't worked. The justice that came from that court came actually not from the court and the legal structures in America. It came from the pressure on the streets. And I think it's really important for us to remember that victory is our victory. It's not the justice system in America or you know the prosecution case. It's our, and it's the anti-racist movement. It's our victory, because that would never have happened. I don't believe for a moment we would have got a guilty verdict if we had, you know, not been out on the streets. I think because people talk about the fact, isn't it, that actually there was video footage that was different. Well, we've had previous killings. There's been video footages that, you know, it's not like we did Rodney King, who can forget? We all saw the video. We all saw what happened. So I think it's really important for us to recognize that they've had the report. It has no credibility. It's really important we keep saying that, and we put that to one side and actually build and continue to build the mass movement, because I think the guilty verdict is a taste of what we can do when we come out. The fact that we are talking about decolonizing the curriculum in Britain today is a taste of what we can achieve. The fact that the new crime bill has come out, the fact that they're trying to push the crime bill is another example of how they are trying to push back the gains that we've made. And I think it's really important we don't do that. I think we continue to talk about real change. You know, we want to bring down, we want to topple more statues. We don't want to live in a society where we look up to these, and they are always great men, aren't they? Great white men who have made their wealth on the back of slavery. And they talk about, oh, but some of the great stuff they did, the schools that they set up, the orphans they supported, all of them. Actually, it doesn't change the fact that they made that money and their wealth from the blood and sweat of slaves, and they can then do a bit of work, you know, spread that bit of their wealth around. But we still have to need to campaign against it. So for me, I think when we commemorate Stephen Lawrence, the day of Stephen Lawrence Day, I think it's really important to recognise, yes, we've had some victories, and the fact that actually it is really important to say that the fact that people were actually, individuals are found guilty of murdering Stephen Lawrence, the fact that the report happened only came about because of the campaign that Stephen Lawrence's family set up. It was a campaign that they set up, which was rooted, let's be honest, in the trade union movement. It wouldn't have achieved what it achieved if it wasn't from the support and the strength of the trade union movement, where we are strongest. They achieved all of that by fighting. And I think we on this day, I think as a fitting tribute, I think to Stephen Lawrence and his memory, is to continue the fight, is to continue to fight for real justice and continue to fight for real change. Because yes, the Macpherson report said, you know, institutional racism exists. Yes, we saw some changes, but actually we know those changes aren't enough. Very much it was about, well, we want to have, the saying used to be black faces in high places, but actually I think what we've seen over the last few weeks is it's not enough. We have a Home Secretary. In fact, we have a cabinet that has never been more diverse, but it hasn't meant that actually black lives have improved here in Britain. We have the head of the Met, who is a woman, and yet that didn't stop her from sending in the police and attacking those women at that peaceful vigil. So it's really important to say that it's not about individuals getting into positions of power. That doesn't change the system. We actually need to change it from the bottom up. And I think there are a few things that we as Stand Up to Racism are going to continue to demand. Obviously, we want the inquiry into the deaths. We want the recognition of why Black people have been so impacted by COVID, including the health workers who are on the front line, you know, saving people's lives. We want to continue to build a mass movement, because we recognise that actually we are going to, on the back of this pandemic, we are going to continue to see people losing their jobs. We are going to continue to see the attacks on the welfare state. This government is going to will want to make us pay for it. And the only way they can do that is to use racism. And so we need to absolutely fight on that and recognise that we're going to see a vicious attack from this government. We need to push back on this shocking immigration policies that they want to push through. The treatment of refugees in this country is absolutely appalling. The fact that actually there is only one group of people in Britain can get locked away for not having committed any crime, not having been found guilty of anything, and can be locked away for an indefinite period of time, are refugees, those seeking asylum in Britain today. If this was happening in any other part of the world, we would be up in arms, but it's happening here in Britain. And not only are they locked away, but in a horrendous situation, buildings in facilities that aren't fit. Let's be very clear, aren't fit for people to live in. And therefore we need to fight against all of these things. And I think we need to continue the message around Black Lives Matter. We absolutely need to unite everybody, because as well as fighting racism, we have to recognize that although I think we have continued and we have proved, and I think people have accepted that this new report is not acceptable, they are still trying to push the new crime bill through. And we have to recognize that the impact that will have on our movement will be shocking. We have in Manchester over the entire year now, we have been out on the streets every Wednesday taking the knee. Even during the lockdown, we were out taking the knee. We would not have been able to do that if this crime bill was passed into law. We have been out and we will be out campaigning on the 22nd of May, which is the anniversary of the bill, of George Floyd's murder. We won't be able to do that if this bill came into power, because this bill gives police officers the right to decide that if you're being a nuisance, you don't have a right to demonstrate, and they can stop you from demonstrating, or they can arrest you. And the courts can give you up to 10 years in prison. Now, just bear that in mind. That's 10 years. That's more than a rapist would get for attacking a woman. That's how, that's how much of it will impact us. It will also stop
Thank
us even
you.
from having a static demonstration. I
Thank
think
you.
all the things that we have fought for are going to be, they want to take away from us. And this bill will stop us from being able to fight back. So yeah, I think we need to stand together, build a mass movement, work with other groups against against the bill, and fight for a better world.
Thanks, Nahella. Your passion has definitely shown through, and it's so good. And I really want to say thank you for your contribution, and to everyone who is listening. These are happening. These are fact, and I'm glad we're here today because we care. I think that should be the core reason why we've gathered. I just want to take out 3 points. I call them the 3 C's from what Nahella has said about changing the narrative. The government are trying to change the narrative. That is not possible. We can't be fooled any longer. And and for people coming together, either black or white. And I don't like the term black, but let's just go with it at the moment. But the fact that people are coming together to say enough is enough, that for me is going to bring about the change that we so much yearn for. And again, the culture for change. So if this can happen, I'm sure, like Nahella has rightly said at the end, we will have a better world. So thank you everyone for being patient and listening. And I would like to open this forum to questions. So if you have any questions, can you please go to the participant button and raise your hand, and I will be able to call on you. Thank you.
One of the problems with institutional racism is the fact that this type of actions and duties are placed on local authority, but it relies on individuals initiating, targeting, whether it's freedom of information or whether it is some sort of campaign, and target that campaign towards those institutions. Now we are talking about people who are institutionally at the bottom of the ladder, working very hard to make a living, and it relies on volunteers like me and Nahella in terms of trying to challenge it. There is too much institution challenge. So when I talk about institutional racism and having old institutions, it's all good passing a law. It's very easy for chief executives to sign a piece of paper saying we will behave well and we won't be racist, etc. Actually implementing it and policing it is the problem. By policing, I don't mean the police force. I mean enforcing it is the problem. And so, yes, there is on paper quite a lot of initiatives, but it relies on individuals to actually challenge it.
So I just wanted to say a few words. I think it's great that you're having this meeting and, help build the movement and to recognize some of the work we've already done. A couple of things I do want to say is I think it's really important that we have legislation, and we should always fight for equality legislation, but I think we should also recognize that having the legislation on its own is not enough. We have legislation against racism, we have legislation against women earning less than men, but we know women earn less than men. We have to fight for it. So on one hand, yes, it's great we have legislation, but never forget the power of what we do and the fact that we actually make the difference on the streets. It's not the politicians. Well, when we do have legislation, it's always worth remembering that we only got it because we were out on the streets in the first place. No one just got up and said, oh, I'm going to give women the vote today, so let's put that into law. It was because people fought, and let us never forget that. So those are things I just wanted to say. The other thing I do want to say is there are lots of things coming up. There are key, I think, moments that we need to think about. I don't know about what's happening in Southampton, but for instance, here in Manchester, we've got a big Kill the Bill event on the 1st of May with all sorts of other organisations. I mean, I stand up to race, and we're finding ourselves working with groups that we would never probably work with in the past, because we recognise how much of an attack that bill is to all of us. There's that going on. Like I said, obviously we do want to mark, and we want all the groups to mark the anniversary of George Floyd's murder. So we will be doing things on the 22nd of May, but then also we're asking local groups on the Tuesday, which would be the year that he would have to the day that he would have been killed, to be out and take the knee locally in all their areas if they're not able to do something centrally. So there are things people can get involved in. But I think the most important thing to say is, one of the things that we've learned through the last year is, even under the pandemic and all the constraints, people are coming together and getting organized. Who would have thought that actually we would live in pretty much a global village thanks to Zoom? We've all learned to use technology so much better than we ever thought we were going to do. And it means that we are connected up. And I think we are connected up with activists in America and across, I think Stand Up Tradesman has done some fantastic international meetings. But on Monday evening, there will be a meeting particularly about the report. So I would say to people, if you're not already registered, I know they've got some 800 registrations already for that event, but I think it's a very important meeting. So as Stand Up Tradesman, I'd like to invite everybody to register for that event on the Monday evening. I think one of your organisers, I'm sure, will be happy to post it if you haven't already done so, post the details for that. But I just wanted to say, keep up the great work, well done. Hopefully we will eventually meet on the streets physically sometime soon. But in the meantime, yeah, thank you very much for having me.
I actually agree with to a large extent, but we mustn't forget, I think there's anger and people suffering in silence out there. And I think it is likely to blow up unless we take certain initiatives to address the issues. Now, on a slightly related but different matter, there are two reports published today, which actually says we are institutionally racism, one by Church of England and one by the Board of Deputies for the Jewish community. You know, that is effectively saying we are institutionally racist. You know, we need to do this, need to. Now, these are the things which we were saying 30, 40 years ago, that we need to have more Black people recruited, etc. I don't think that's the answer. I think the answer is, how do you make, especially younger people, feel that they belong? Most people of color find it difficult to define themselves as English. They try to define themselves as British. Why? You know, we won't be comfortable until such time as our institution see a Black person as a Black Englishman rather than a Black person who may have been 3 generations, his grandparents or great-grandparents may have come from this country, but he's still regarded as a foreigner which is being welcomed into this country. So I think to an extent it is getting quiet, but there is a lot of pent-up anger and a lot of I am not getting my just share out there. You know, and that to an extent, pandemic hasn't helped, but I don't think it matters. I think when Barack Obama got elected, some people took their eye off the ball and saying, right, racism done. You know, I think there's a danger that now that Derek Chauvin has been jailed, people will say, oh yeah, things have now changed. And we all know they haven't. And that to an extent does create an issue. I think Jen is quite right. I think it has gone quiet, and but there's a lot of underlying pent-up anger.
As a society, we should be offering hope and not fear. And so I hope that everyone who's come on today can see there is hope when we come together. There is hope when we say and call out what is not right among us. So as I stand up to racism and every other movement out there calling out racism, there is hope, people. Let's get together, come together, and get the change we want, because we now know it's left to us to do it. And you owe it to yourself to do the best you can and call out the government. So thank you everyone who's come on this evening. It's been an honor to have you all, and I hope you'll be able to spread this good news of hope to people and invite them along on the May 1st and on the 2nd of May. Thank you, and I will say good evening and stay blessed. Thank you, everyone.